All right, we are live. Hello, everybody out there. I am Virgil Moorhead Jr., and I'm the Behavioral Health Director here at Two Feathers Native American Family Services. And this is our speaker series. We have a couple of my colleagues with me today, as well as the wonderful Dr. Jean Rhodes. How we're going to do this today is Dr. Rhodes will have some slides, and then we'll have some questions, and we're going to talk about her upcoming book. Before I talk a little bit more about Dr. Rhodes, I want to let everybody know that and pay honor to the Wiyot people. That is the land that I'm currently on here in McKinleyville, and that Two Feathers is on. That we want to pay honor and recognition to the Wiyot people, and we also want to let all those that are tuning in know that Two Feathers, as an agency, stands in solidarity with those that are on and fighting for social justice and equity in our country. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen for 1 second and talk a little bit about our presenter. And what we're going to be talking about is her upcoming book, Older and Wiser, New Ideas for Youth Mentoring in the 21st Century. Dr. Rhodes is I think considered, and many would agree, one of the foremost experts on youth mentoring. Dr. Rhodes is the professor of psychology and the director of the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring at University of Massachusetts, Boston. She has done all sorts of things in her career. Here are some pictures of some of her current work and work over the last several decades, including the Rhodes Lab, which is, training and doing a lot of research, cutting edge research on mentorship in this country and I think internationally. The Chronicle of Evidence-Based Mentoring, the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring, and Connected Scholars. All of these you can find on her from the Rhodes Lab. And it's, over the last couple of days, I've been checking up on her work and followed her work for a while. And it's so easy and accessible and really top of the line science, as well as really translatable to people that are not scientists. So check her work out. And with that, welcome, Dr. Rhodes.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's taking time today to join this conversation. I'm going to share my screen briefly so I can talk to you about what I've been up to with this book, and then we'll hopefully have time for some questions. So as Virgil was nice enough to mention, I have a brand new book. You can get it from Amazon, and it's the product of really 30 years of research, and it actually took several years to write. It was supposed to be easy, but it was really hard, and you'll see why. I also want to thank, as we mentioned, I have a lab at the center, and I've had the pleasure and honor of working with some amazing young scholars, some of whom are professors themselves now, and have had a lot of support for the research I've done and my students have done over the years. This is me 30 years ago when I started as an assistant professor at the psychology department at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, with my mother dropping me off at work for the first day as a professor. And I can tell you that I have been studying youth mentoring since then. So for 30 years, I have really kind of gone after this field. Because other fields kind of pull me over and I get drawn into things, but I always come back to this field because I find it so interesting and so important for our nation's youth. And I wrote a book about 15 years ago called Stand By Me, The Risks and Rewards of Mentoring Today's Youth. And I was approached by my publisher, Harvard University Press, to update it, basically, to bring it up to date. It didn't sound hard, especially since I have this chronicle where I write columns, and I urge you to subscribe. It's free. It's called the Chronicle of Evidence-Based Mentoring. And we have lots of those young people writing posts, and we review articles. So I thought, well, I can just take some of my new summaries and I'll bring this book up to date. Well, it wasn't like that, because as I got into the data, I realized that we really needed to rethink youth mentoring. And in order to rethink it, I really needed to go deep. And that's how I ended up with a whole new approach. So here's the chronicle. Again, you can just go over there. It's evidence-based-mentoring.org is the URL. But if you type in the Chronicle of Evidence-Based Mentoring, you'll find it. And so I sat down at the oldest library in Boston back about 2 years ago, and you could find me there most days sitting at one of these tables looking out at the Boston Common, just trying to figure out youth mentoring and how we can improve it. And my biggest question as I started this is, what kind of impact is youth mentoring having? Are we just kind of looking at things that would have happened anyway, or is mentoring really making a big difference? And I'm talking about formal mentoring programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and Friends of the Children, and things like that. And so the first thing I did is I looked at what are called meta analyses. And what that is where you take all the papers that have been published on a particular topic, whether it's, the value of aspirin or car seats or youth mentoring, it doesn't matter. You just look at what are the evaluations showing, and then you look for something called an effect size, which is basically the magnitude of impact. So I said, I'm going to start by looking at all the meta analyses that have ever been done on youth mentoring. And I plotted them out, and I looked at what's called the effect size. And so if you think about, and this is the only real stats I'm going to require of this class today, but if you think about this is a distribution of scores that somebody might get on an outcome like, grades or behavior or whatever. And let's just say the blue line is the treatment group, that's their distribution, and this might be the control group. And what you're looking for is a big difference between the two. And that's basically what an effect size is it's the difference between if you got never treated at all versus if you're treated. And there's no easy conventions, but keep these numbers in mind. A small effect is about this. Psychotherapy gets, between 0.5 and 0.8. Various interventions are all over the place. So what is the effect of youth mentoring? Well, this was one of the wake up calls when I sat to write the book. And what it shows is that the effect size of youth mentoring has not budged in almost 20 years. This was a meta analysis that a colleague of mine, David Dubois, did back in 2002. And here's one that my former postdoc, Liz Raposa, did in 2019. And you don't see a big difference. And what you see in the background here, we plotted how many articles have been written on the topic of youth mentoring, how much money has been spent on mentoring programs. And you see those have gone up, but it hasn't moved the needle at all on youth mentoring. So my next question was why? Why is this happening? And I had a bunch of reasons, and you can read about them. But I think a big reason is that we really haven't kind of come to terms with the fact that the young people, particularly young people who are being referred to mentoring programs, are often struggling with some pretty serious difficulties. And we get so caught up in kind of the buzz of positive youth development and, thriving and, assets and all of that, which is fantastic. But what we were ignoring is that many times parents and schools are looking to mentoring programs to do what maybe professional service providers are doing. They're looking to mentoring programs as to providing mental health care, providing tutoring, providing all sorts of things. And what we're providing is not that. And so this is a study that my colleague Roger Jajora and Carla Herrera and others did, where they kind of looked at they looked at 30 business as usual or sort of typical mentoring programs across the United States. And that represented over 2,000 young people. And they just reported what their level of challenges were, like what percentage were below poverty, what percentage had a single parent. And what my students and I did is compared that to national averages. And what should pop out here for you is that compared to national averages, young people who are referred to mentoring programs are double the risk, double on lots of indicators. Attention deficit issues, mental health challenges. Many of them are living in extreme poverty, and so forth. And what we also see, this is kind of an interesting little study that was done by some colleagues, but what they showed is that when their daughter or son's mental health issues were in the normal range, Black and white parents are equally likely to think that they need a mentoring program. But as soon as young Black men and women, boys and girls, mental health problems get worse or elevated, Black parents are much more likely to think of a mentoring program as the place to go for mental health care. Okay, so they're twice as likely to see a need for mental health care when their child's mental health struggles are elevated. So again, that tells us that the parents and often young people are looking for some real services when they go to mentoring programs. Another study that came out of Canada showed that 25% of parents said the reason they wanted their young person in a school-based mentoring program was because of mental health issues. Okay. And yet, when we look at what these programs are providing, um, they're often providing what we would call positive youth development. They're providing activities and fun, going off and playing games and doing things like community service together. But really, when Roger and his colleagues looked, many of the young people who were being served by mentoring programs, close to 90%, were already getting positive youth development experiences. And over 70% said that they already had a natural mentor, and over 90% said they already had a good relationship with a teacher. So that led me again to think, well, maybe, if that's what, if the young people already have mentors and are already involved in positive youth development, then maybe mentoring programs shouldn't just be thinking of themselves as a positive youth development program and thinking themselves more in terms of providing targeted care for the young people that are being referred. Yet when you look at what young people are doing, and mentors, what they said, they asked the mentors about how much of your time with your mentee do you spend on these things. The number one thing was having fun. Okay, so think about the young people, think about the parents thinking that they need this service, and then when they get together with their mentor, a lot of times it's to have fun, it's to just talk, to hike, or do physical activities, creative activities. There's nothing wrong with those things. Those things help to build the relationship, but in addition to the relationship, it looks like more is needed. And there's also a mismatch with volunteers. We looked at over 17,000 matches, and overall, almost 40% of mentors give up mentoring after just a few months. These are early um, attrition. So, you know, years ago, a colleague said mentors are better at signing up than showing up. And that really hasn't changed. That mentors are very excited. They see posters that make them feel like they're going to make a big difference. All of that happens. And then they get with young people who are struggling, and it's too much for them to really deal with because they don't have the right tools. Okay. And so you hear that when you talk to mentors. My colleague Renee Spencer did a study of young people and their mentors and why those relationships fell apart so quickly. And overall, it was just that the mentors were just feeling overwhelmed, that the young people that they were matched with had more developmental needs and circumstances that they felt they could handle. And so they gave up. And so, this is just basically what I think we did is we thought about mentoring. This is the National Academy of Science puts um, prevention programs kind of on this continuum from promotion to treatment and so on. And we've kind of thought of mentoring programs as kind of being a universal good for all young people, something like that. But what I would argue is we're really serving young people who have higher risk factors due to things like poverty and trauma, and in some cases are already showing early signs and symptoms of struggles. And so we need to kind of think about mentoring not so much as a positive youth development program, but as something that in some ways is treating, whether we acknowledge it or not, young people who are further down that risk continuum. So I hope I've convinced you at this point, and I'm going to continue to try to convince you that our models aren't quite meeting the needs and circumstances of many of the young people that they're serving. So more recently, researchers like my colleagues Mike Lyons and Sam McQuillan and others have found that um, yes, we need a good relationship. That is the backbone of any helping, caring, teaching, any relationship. There has to be a connection. But in addition to that, there needs to be, a focus of some sort to the relationship, maybe focusing on building skills or achieving goals. And when you can balance those two, you get better effects. Now, I have to apologize in advance for this next slide. There's a lot of numbers, but there's one main point I want to make about it. on the left is the effects of what I would call the friendship model. The model, kind of like Big Brothers Big Sisters, many of those programs where you get together and you build a relationship, and it's non-specific. They're not trying to target any particular thing. And these are programs many of you have heard of: I Mentor, Friends of the Children, Big Brothers Big Sisters. And I want you to look at those effect sizes. Remember, a small effect is zero point 0.2. These are effects that are closer to zero in many cases, right? And yet, when you compare that to programs that are very focused and skills based, you see that those effects are much, much larger, right? And so they're getting effects that are really of a different order of magnitude than ones that are more non-specific and friendship based. Um, and so as I sat in that library, I thought, okay, that's the direction the field needs to go. But how does a big program that's serving kids of all different types, like one kid might walk in with academic problems, and the next young person might be struggling with trauma or struggling with extreme poverty or all sorts of issues that are associated with injustice, and other kids are struggling with mental health problems. And how do you provide targeted care to all of those? Because if you look, the programs that are getting the big effects are really specific. These are mentoring youth with psychiatric disorders, or STEM mentoring for students with disabilities. It's no wonder they're getting big effects, because they're able to really target in on the population they're serving. But I would call those boutique programs. And big kind of superstore programs don't have the luxury of just zeroing in on one thing, and they can't possibly be expected to. Nor can their volunteers be expected to deliver interventions that are, complicated, when they're provided with very little oversight typically, and it's hard to, there's large caseloads in these programs. So what do we do? Um, Well, I also just have this final slide, and that's just a new study that my colleagues and I have completed, where we compared this sort of non-specific Big Brothers Big Sisters type program to more targeted programs. And what you see again is double and sometimes triple the effects depending on the outcome. So if you are wanting to get better academic outcomes, targeted programs give you triple the effects. If you want better mental health outcomes, targeted programs, again, triple. Same thing with social functioning, almost triple. So we know the path. We know that we need to target. We know that we need to balance relationships with skills. But how do big programs do that? How do your programs do that? And this took me a while to kind of really think through, and I'd like to share it with you. And um, the book will go into greater depth. But basically, I came to the idea, and others have too, that we need to kind of shift our thoughts from like thinking about the relationship as the intervention to the relationship as a context for targeted intervention. Okay. Um, and so here's what I have a chapter where I spell this out called The Road to Rigor. But I say, okay, maybe we shouldn't be doing mentoring the same way. We should think about different approaches to mentoring. But one thing all programs can do and can continue to do is what they do best. They can recruit and screen and train their mentors and supervise them and do all the things that mentoring programs do. And if you're a small specialized program, well, we know you get good effects, so go for it. Train your mentors to deliver this targeted evidence-based approach. And the mentor's role is to deliver that. But what if you're a larger program and you're not going to be a boutique? We can't expect mentors to be delivering the intervention with much fidelity, and we know that the further our like if you're trying to do a program that has been shown to be effective, the further we get from what it takes to be effective, the less effective it is. So what I said is mentors really should be not so much delivering mental health care as support, not just mental health care, delivering targeted care, but supporting it. So I came up with two solutions. One I call blended mentoring, and you train mentors to support technology delivered interventions, like mental health apps. Like there's there's like this universe of really good mental health, jobs training, workforce development, um, social emotional learning, all all sorts of apps and technology delivered interventions out there, but they don't really work as well without what's called supportive accountability, somebody that's kind of tracking you. And that's something that mentors can do. The other thing is to find the systems that the young people are already in, whether it's the school system or a mental health care system or a court system, and embed the mentors there to support the care that they're already getting there. If they're learning new skills, the mentor can practice them with them and so forth. So this is embedded mentoring, blended mentoring, and specialized mentoring. And I would say, depending on what your goals are, these are three things that seem to really have, and I review programs that kind of exemplify each of those. So there, I was talking about these apps. There's an app called Super Better, and I want you to, now that you know effect sizes, young people who use it get really much higher score on emotional behavioral regulation, on depression. There's one called IntelliCare. It's a suite of 13 mini apps for young people that teaches them um, basically cognitive behavioral care for depression, anxiety, mindfulness, gratitude, all of the great things. And they recently published a study where they saw a 50% reduction in depression and anxiety after just 8 weeks. Um, there's ones for academics. We know about Khan Academy. There's to do Toto Math, which is a really dynamic math program for young people who are starting to slip because of COVID and other reasons. There's Khan Academy for older young people that does like SAT prep and all sorts of stuff. There's one that I developed that Virgil talked about, Connected Scholars. We now have it on an app called Connected Futures, and it teaches young people job skills and has mock interviews, and it teaches them how to recruit a network of caring adults. And also, there's lots of other stuff on there, and it's free, so we can talk about that too. But we have gotten really good findings from that as well. And so there's a lot of benefits to technology delivered interventions. And, I won't belabor all of those bullet points, but I can tell you this took me, another couple months or so to write up because I had to do a real deep dive into what are the benefits. And one of them is going to be data because they capture a lot more data. You can scale them at marginal cost. There's lots of culturally, linguistically adapted ones. They are free often. You can repeat them over and over again. There's a big problem, though, with technology delivered interventions. And that's where I think mentors come in. Engaging young people in apps has proven to be almost impossible. They have the lowest use after 1 month. In the absence of support, less than 5% of young people reopen an app, even if they've been told it could really help them. Whether it's Headspace or whatever, it's just hard to go back alone to those apps. And so, based on that, there's a scholar that I've gotten to know very well, David Moore, who talked about this model called a supportive accountability. And this is when a light bulb went off. He says, we argue that human support increases adherence through accountability to a coach, and you can put in mentor, who is seen as trustworthy, benevolent, and having expertise. That's what a mentor can be. They can provide that supportive accountability, but then leave the actual intervention to this wonderful world out there of technology delivered interventions. And what researchers are finding that when supplemented with coaching, technology delivered interventions produce outcomes that rival those of face-to-face interventions. So in the past year, I finished that book about a year ago. I've been working with a team of scientists to try to figure out how to bring this idea to light. So I said, okay, what the book showed me is that there's mentors in need of evidence-based interventions. There's evidence-based interventions that are really in need of coaches and mentors. And let's figure out how to put those two things together. So in this model, the mentor's role is to continue to form a bond and to provide supportive accountability and supervised practice. And then the program can determine what the young person's goal should be. And that's really unlimited. And then we find the best technology delivered solution to achieve those goals. And so what I came up with is an app that's free called Mentor Hub, and it's the first ever supportive accountability app. It enables mentors and programs to track and encourage mentees' use of the world's best apps. And basically, what we've done is we've gotten what's called the API, or the user data from these apps, and mentors will know whenever their mentee signs on and can track them, nudge them, troubleshoot with them, and make sure they remain engaged. And you can learn more at mentorhub.org. You can sign up to be a partner with us or whatever. Um, the embedded mentoring, there's some really good examples of that as well. Programs that, like Boston Partners in Education, actually puts mentors into the classroom and helps young people stay on track in whatever class they're falling behind in. There's therapeutic mentors who are assigned by the young person's therapist to help them practice their cognitive behavioral skills. And we know that when you practice anything from anything you're trying to learn, if you practice it, you get better at it. And what a great role for a paraprofessional or untrained mentor is to just practice it without ever having to deliver it. And so that's the basic idea of the book, is that if we want positive outcomes um, from mentors, what we need is to bring in targeted evidence-based interventions. And I've tried to talk you through a couple ideas that I came up with as I wrote the book that might help to do that. And I want to thank you. And this is wrong. But anyway, that book is available over Amazon if you ever want it. And now I will open it up for questions if we have any.
Yes. Thank you. That was beautiful. That was so clear, and my the light bulbs were going off
Oh, good.
throughout the conversation. So clarity, 100%. And so a question that I have, kind of to bring it into today's times, is one of the critiques of mentorship, and you write about it a little bit, is how it can individualize social problems.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you can, talk a little bit about the ways, you wrote a article, co-wrote, from treatment to empowerment, new approaches to youth mentoring, but just unpack a little bit more of the ways that the mentorship field, the mentor field, is tackling these social justice issues.
Okay. Um, well, half of the book is about formal mentoring. The second half, as you know, and what that article was about, is about these new models that are natural mentoring. And the idea is that, and you saw that in the data, that many young people already have a natural mentor. And the way this relates to social justice and trying to avoid individualizing problems is that I believe that, um, and I think you guys will all agree, that it's really natural mentors that help young people really get ahead. Nobody makes it on their own. Some teacher or some caring adult that we might meet along the way that helps us become empowered. And so rather than giving a mentor to a young person, we can teach them how to recruit mentors and teach them the skills for building what's called social capital. And social capital is the basic idea is that, we have financial capital, whatever's in our bank, um, but social capital is really your bank of relationships. And what researchers have found is that, yes, um, young people in poverty, disenfranchised, marginalized young people are just as likely to have natural mentors, slightly less, but not dramatically less likely to have natural mentors. The difference is that their mentors don't have as much capacity to connect them to new opportunities. So we did a study using this really large database called the Ad Health database, and it, we divided it by young people who were, very low income, marginalized young people, and then ones that were higher income. And they were, what we found is that the young people, the more marginalized young people, their mentors, they did not see them as role models, and they were less likely to connect them to educational and to occupational opportunities. They were more likely to be what are called strong ties. And so sociologists make this distinction between weak ties and strong ties. And strong ties are like your grandma, your people in your family, probably the people you've been quarantining with. But the weak ties are, this teacher that you knew who connect you to a summer job, it's the richer kids are more likely to have those weak ties. And so what we're trying to do with Connected Scholars and Connected Futures is connect marginalized young people to more weak ties, to more social capital. And we're also trying to convince caring adults that right now it's very difficult through taxes and everything else to share your wealth with marginalized young people. We all ask, how can we help marginalized young people? One of the biggest ways we can help is by sharing our social capital, by being that person that connects somebody that might not be in your inner circle to an opportunity, that puts a young person who's marginalized above somebody who's not marginalized and says, this person deserves that internship and that opportunity. And it's, we've been talking a lot, as we talk about social justice, that how much, for example, me as a white person, how much are white people willing to give up? It's easy to give lip service to say Black Lives Matter. It's easy to do all that, but what am I willing to give up? And what what we really need to give up is our social capital. We need to share our connections and really bridge those ties and make sure that that is available to everyone. And one of the ways to do that is to teach young people and to empower them, to basically teach them to fish. But we also have to stock the pond. And we have to, every time, it may seem inconsequential, every time we give the advantage to somebody who already has advantages, we're depriving that opportunity from someone who doesn't have those advantages. And so I think that's the way we're going to really think about social justice. I think that um, you are absolutely right that what formal mentoring often does is it puts the onus on the young person to conjure up the skills to overcome stressors that are no fault of their own. The stressors of being in a neighborhood where there's huge gun violence and crime and the stressors of ongoing racial discrimination. It's a hard for a mentor to address that. So that's the part of like strengthening the young person and making them advocates for themselves that can help.
Thank you. And we had in our native community a epidemic in 2016, a suicide epidemic, and one of the responses was purchasing wrestling mats and in enhancing the wrestling program for the youth. That was the response. And so I know Chris is also a mentor with us, and he is also helped with the basketball team. And so I know he has a question around these sort of informal sports and how that's tied into mentorship. Chris, did you want to ask your question?
Uh, yeah, thank you, Virgil. Also, hi, Gene, again. I thinking about myself personally. A lot of my mentors were those coaches and were those what you're calling natural mentors. So how do you think you can get someone who is more of a natural mentor to be that formal mentor or have that kind of next step and that next connection with the youth?
So you're absolutely right. Coaches are really important mentors. And if you go to the Rhodes Lab website, we've actually written an article where we show over like 10 years, if you had a coach in high school, you're more likely to a coach mentor, you're more likely to graduate college. Controlling for sports participation. So something above and beyond just being in the sport, having that coach mentor. And the problem and really the inequity of it all is that those men that the schools have so few coaches per student and so few guidance counselors and so few nurses. And those are the frontline people that many young people spend a lot of their days, or like they used to before COVID, spend a lot of their time with. And so I think part of it is increasing the ratio of coaches and teachers and other caring adults to young people. It's that idea of stocking the pond. But I also think we need to empower young people to really reach out. I also think, though, that, and I've seen this many times, that we're asking, you know, if coaches become that mentor and then the young person says, I'm feeling suicidal or I'm feeling really depressed. I think having these technology delivered interventions and providing that supportive accountability can deal with that, can help them get evidence-based care within that relationship with them without them actually having to be their therapist, but saying, hey, there's this really good app that really helps you deal with your feelings, and I'll be your coach on that as well. Or I'll teach you how to recruit a mentor who can be your coach on that. So I think we need to kind of both increase the number of these caring adults, but also link them to evidence-based tools that are already available.
I have a follow up to that one as well. You talking about the technology and all that stuff. For I know for my community, the Native community, they're very big on the cultural aspect of stuff too. Is there any way we can get that into the formal mentorship or as an alternative to the technology or some type of way? Because I know that for my community, the culture is just as big as anything else in our community. So that's something that we want to strive for as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of studies of like, um, I'll just talk about mental health apps right now, that across cultures, they're equally effective. Now, what you're talking about is like embedding it within a broader frame that aligns with culture, right? And I think that would be I don't think that these apps, I mean, I've looked at them and some of them have tried to do that, but I think that they just need to be seen as part of the conversation, but not the whole conversation, because these apps are attempting to be culturally sensitive and show cultural humility. They're really based on, you know, lots of research, but they can't really deal with the social ecology of every place where they're being implemented. And so that's for the program itself to kind of create that context and have those conversations. Um, but I also think empowerment and youth initiated mentoring sends the message that the expertise lies in the culture. It's not some expert that comes in from outside, but you need to think about the people in your life who can be that mentor for you. So
Thank you. I know Amada, has some thoughts on this, including sort of recruitment of mentors. Amada?
So as you were explaining kind of the whole recruitment idea and the whole naturality of it being within our environment kind of, and broadening that and giving them, enhancing it. This last year, you're kind of like blowing my mind because I was just walking through it in my life a little bit. I was a coach for Fortuna High, and we had probably the biggest coaching staff. We had like 6 coaches. Every time we would go to a game, we would kind of get, oh, wow, you have a lot of coaches, or it was just kind of a joke. But we ended up going on to winning NCS and having a title and being the first out of our whole school to ever do that for the girls team. And so I think that has to come in a lot to play with that. But that was just like, whoa, big evidence buster. But I kind of just wanted to kind of more break that down and see how you reference with Robert Putnam's statistic that only 1/3 of youth experience a mentor relationship. And I'm kind of wanting to know how you feel that we can get more people within this mentorship role, but how you kind of involve that into your research studies, I guess you can say, because you've been doing this for 30 years.
yeah. So again, I think actually the Putnam statistic is less than 5% of kids have a formal mentor or will have a formal mentor. And the other statistic is that about 70% say they have a natural mentor. So I think that the thing about the natural mentors is we have to teach young people how to recruit natural mentors outside their inner circle. Because once young people are empowered to recruit mentors, it's unlimited. One of the things that mentoring programs spend the most money and time on is recruiting volunteers. But if you can empower young people to recruit their own volunteers, you've solved a lot of that problem of wait lists and everything else. And we just did a meta-analysis on youth-initiated mentoring, is what it's called, and it is just as effective as formal mentoring, if not more. So I think that's one of the models. I think it's great that you had 6 coaches per for the team, and it doesn't surprise me that you won the title given that. So congratulations.
Thank you. And I wanted to kind of break down a little bit more about formal and normal, informal, natural kind of mentorship. Yeah. And if you can give your kind of background on the difference of the two, just because I think that's a really good
differentiation. So formal mentorings are the ones that are arranged through a program where the volunteer is screened and trained, and there's a case manager who kind of checks up on it every week or however often they need to. It's usually time limited, and it's more like a paraprofessional helping relationship. Natural mentors are the teachers, coaches, elders that young people find on their own. And I think one of the problems with the field of youth mentoring has actually been that we share that word, because I don't think those two types of relationships are that similar, and I think when you infuse the word mentor into one of these formal, power professional, time limited relationships, it puts undue burden on it, like to be that kind of major figure, and it kind of prevents you from thinking of it as something that is really more like a professional relationship that requires training and evidence and things like that.
Thank you for that insight. I kind of, why I stuck with it is because my coach was like a mentor to me, kind of how Chris was saying in that sense. So it's all well-rounded itself. So thank you for that. And I'll kick it back to Virgil.
Yeah, so part of our speaker series is, as you can see, we try to be collaborative in our questions and try to work as a team. And we also take questions from the audience. And so I have a question from the audience, and we have a, sorry about that. Somebody outside was honking their horn. But a question from the audience is, and it's, I think, part of, I think, your work, or at least part of, I think, evidence-based mentorship is around training. And so we have a question from Charlie Reed, who's tuning in on Facebook Live. And he says, you might, if any of your studies or colleagues came across effective training programs that better prepare and prevent mentors from burnout.
Yeah, I mean, I think the burnout comes in part because they're given a challenge that's almost not, they're being told just form a friendship, the bond will be everything. And then it's hard to form a bond sometimes. And the young person has serious issues that need to be addressed. And so I think part of it is giving mentors the right tools. And that's why I think, embedding them in systems where there's other professionals or providing technology delivered interventions ensures that there's the right tools. Training in how to form a good relationship is available through the National Mentoring Partnership, mentoring.org. I actually wrote something called the Elements of Effective Practice, but they have other toolkits on there that I encourage you to look at. What I'm developing at the Center for Evidence-Based Mentoring is training in supportive accountability and training, because I believe that, so that's one piece that that'll be available. I'm also developing training in something called how to build a working alliance, because, like, for example, Amanda was talking about her coach was her mentor, and it's because they had a working alliance. They were working on something, sports, and they were going to do it. And the problem with a lot of mentor relationships is they don't really have a focus, right? And so now that I'm kind of saying, well, let's have a focus to this relationship. Well, now we're moving from just a kind of a friendship to a working alliance. And so I'm developing training in how to motivate young people to really want to stay engaged, and how to express attunement and empathy and all of that. So those are the two trainings I have available, but I also say that, the mentoring.org is another place to go.
Thank you. And what about, I mean, it seems like we've talked a fair amount about like one-on-one group, and there's group mentoring too. And so what are your thoughts about group-based mentoring? Because here at Two Feathers, we started in within sort of more collective oriented cultures, such as many Native American communities. And so what are your thoughts about group mentorship versus sort of more the one-on-one? Because here at Two Feathers, we started a mentorship called Intertribal Mentorship Academy. And it was one mentor like Chris and Amada with 3 or 4 youth. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about group versus individual mentorship.
It all comes down to what you're doing with the time, right? And if it's grounded in best practice and evidence, I don't see why there can't be more than one mentee, right? As long as a good relationship can be forged across all of those relationships. I mean, you see that with, teachers. Teachers can do things in groups that make a big difference in young people's lives. I think that the key, though, is that you have to know what is your intention. What is the focus of why you're getting together, and are you achieving that goal? We're also finding, I just did a meta-analysis on cross-age peer mentoring. And that's kind of mentoring within a generation. So you'll have like a high school student mentoring an elementary age school student. And we're finding that that's enormously effective, twice as effective as intergenerational. And it's because um, there's a lot more structure and a lot more supervision of the mentors. So again, it doesn't really matter who the mentor is or what the context is. Is there structure? Is there intention? Is it grounded in evidence? What outcomes are you looking at? To just say, is mentoring effective, is to say, like, is parenting effective? Is teaching effective? Well, it depends on the teacher. It depends on the instruction. It depends on a lot of things.
That makes sense. And just one more follow up before Amada asked the last question. You have about 10 minutes. In the psychotherapy literature, there's a lot, the last 10, 15 years around therapist factors. So not so much about the what intervention, whether it's CBT or ACT or DBT, that predicts outcomes. It's more actually who the therapist is. And so one argument from that research would be, in a community like ours, the small rural native community, then maybe we should look and try to identify who would be a good therapist early on with that sort of temperament, those qualities, and develop them. And so I'm wondering if that you at all see that within the mentor broadly speaking, literature research about sort of the mentor qualities, characteristics of who they are.
Yeah. Um, well, one of the strongest findings that keeps coming up in a lot of studies is that mentors who have a background in any kind of helping profession make better mentors. So there is something there. There's something about the training that they receive and the experience they have. It's not to say people from other fields can't be effective, but they're more effective initially. The things that are sort of best practices, empathy and attunement. Those are things that researchers have looked at a lot. Knowing when to back off, and to rebuild the relationship. I have an entire chapter on the science of building a good relationship that I pull actually from a lot of the research on psychotherapy and child and adolescent relationships.
Okay, yeah, because it seems like we had a speaker. He was the founder of the National Compadres Network. His name's Jerry Teo, and he talked about that in order to do good work with like youth of color, as he saw it over the last 30 years, is that you have to love the kids. Like
Yeah.
you have to love them. That's the empathy, but it's like deeper than that. And he tied it into sort of a spiritual piece of a spiritual calling, because it's hard work, it's a commitment, there's a lot of sacrifice.
I would have to disagree a little bit, and here's what I say. The research, and remember, I ground whatever I say in the research. The research shows that you have to have a base of a good relationship. But after that, the added sort of depth and closeness in a formal mentoring relationship does not add any additional effectiveness. So you just have to have a good working relationship. You don't need to like it because if you put that expectation on every volunteer, you need to have this everlasting bond. You need to love them. I think you need to like them. And you need to be able to get along with them and have trust. But I think it's been a mistake to kind of romanticize how close that relationship has to be for it to be effective. And there's a lot of new studies that are coming out from Sam McQuillan and others that are showing that after a certain point, there's no added value to increase closeness.
Okay, that makes sense.
You definitely have to like them. And the
It,
young person has to feel like the adult gets them and likes them and wants to see them and all of that.
well, I guess where my thoughts are coming from too is the importance of like consistency and a
Yeah, yeah.
commitment. And but at the same time, I think I read some of your recent research where there the long term, like there was this argument that it has to be long term, and that's starting to be contested as well within the research.
Yeah, it's sort of the same way in psychotherapy, I'm a clinical psychologist. We've gone from thinking that, by the way, I noticed you had Joe Gahn on a show in the
Yeah.
past. He was a student in when I was a professor at Illinois, he was getting his PhD at the time. So that was cool. But anyway, in our training back when I first started, it was very Freudian and you had to go deep and psychoanalytic and all of that. And now we're very problem focused, right? So, you saw those results of depression, anxiety, it was 8 weeks and you had results. Or if you have other issues, that can be resolved much quicker depending on the tools and the strategy that you use.
Makes sense. So I'm going to leave it to Chris or Amada to throw out any last questions or comments to Dr. Jean Rhodes. Who's going to take it?
I'll take it. This may be a very specific question based on my work, because I work a lot with boys, and more specifically boys of color. And doing some of the research, it shows that like boys benefit a lot more for some reason from this mentorship and from having that person to look up to. Before we end, I kind of want to hoping you could talk a little about that and how it's more of a how it can benefit them and have them uh, lead that next generation. Because I know for Native kids, they have a lot of trouble looking for Native role models that are men.
Yeah. Well, remember, there's a big difference between formal and informal relationships, and so we don't know that that applies to natural or informal. But you're absolutely right. Two different meta-analyses have shown that boys benefit more than girls in formal mentoring, and we don't know exactly why that is. But one possibility is if you really think about kind of why a young person might be referred to a mentoring program. And if you have a son and you're a single mom, your son might not even be struggling that much, but you just feel like he needs a man in his life. And so it's not like there's there's this huge high threshold of problems before they get the referral. Where if you have a daughter, what would provoke you to seek out another woman to be their mentor? Maybe they have more mental health issues coming in, right? And so that's what we're finding is that the girls sometimes have a harder time trusting and connecting initially with this other woman, with the female mentor. But what we are also finding is that those relationships, once they take, last longer and are quite effective. So it's still something that I think another dissertation or two could dig deeper into, but I think it's an interesting question.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time, Dr. Rose, and I also want to give you an opportunity if there's anything last words of wisdom or anything that you wanted to add before we get off here.
I just want to say that, I've been looking at your websites and the work that you're doing. And I, Virgil knows initially I was going to, I said, I'm really busy. I have a doctoral student who could do it. But once I saw the amazing work, I was like, I have to be there. I really want to help in any way I can and learn from what you guys are doing. And so I hope this is the beginning of a conversation, and that you'll feel free to come back and share your ideas with me, and I'll share mine with you.
Yes, absolutely. That's great to hear, and thank you for that. I think in these times we continue to try to do the best work that we can, but it can be a challenge, and so thank you for that. And thanks to everybody that was tuned in today. We will get to your questions that we missed or comments on our Facebook comment section. And also, I wanted everybody to know that tomorrow we're also going to have one more speaker series, and that's with Dr. Joanna Williams out of University of Virginia. She's one of the top, I think, researchers, leaders in with racial, ethnic socialization and positive youth development. So it should be a pretty interesting and very informative talk. So tune in, and that's going to be tomorrow at 12 p.m. And so thanks again.
Thank you.
Feathers is checking out.